Hey everyone, it's week 3 in research methods in composition and rhetoric. I'm still on the cough drop. But this week we're going to cover ways that researchers in the field, that they go about refining and fine-tuning research questions. How do they go about going from that initial research question into something that they actually use for their project? They engage in a number of different kinds of approaches. We talked about one last week. They read a lot. They just read what other folks have written about a particular topic. This week we're going to cover some of the other ways that researchers go about refining a research question, and let's start covering them now. Let's start with observations. If you're thinking about doing something workplace related or teaching related, I think observations are an excellent way to begin refining a research question. Blakesley and Fleischer, they talk about how observations can make the familiar unfamiliar. It's where you consciously step back and look at something that you might take for granted. So you might do something like that for like a classroom activity. So if you're a classroom teacher with some experience, maybe this is something where you take time and say, I'm not going to be a teacher in this instance. I'm going to observe somebody else's class, and you observe how students are interacting around a particular phenomena that you're interested in. If you're if you're thinking about a workplace setting, you might, let's say you're curious about how people interact and take turns in conversations in a workplace setting. You might ask to sit in on a meeting and just observe how people are going back and forth. Like, you're not there to participate in the meeting, but you're there to kind of make that very familiar thing, like a meeting or a classroom or something like that. You make it unfamiliar and you look at it from a totally different perspective as somebody that's just there to observe. There's a long tradition in teacher research of folks doing this kind of work to spark research projects. So you start with an initial question, like, I'm really unhappy with how peer review is going, so I'm going to observe a peer review either in my class or in somebody else's class, and you try to make that familiar thing unfamiliar. To take a few of the topics that you all have talked about, James, I think, observing students in a science class that are trying to make sense of a writing project. They get a prompt, and you're just kind of listening to them talk about how they would go about tackling that writing project. That could be a fascinating thing that you could do. Lynette, an observation of students team writing a paragraph or getting them to talk, or a class where somebody else is talking about this is what makes a successful paragraph, and then observing students and how are they digesting that and what speaks to them, where do they kind of tune out and they're not paying attention. That could be something that you might do. Alan, observing people play a video game, or not a video game, rather, but that the table game that you were talking about in your week 1 post. I think that that's something that you could do. Like, how are people doing that identity making work in the game, and just observing it as an outside observer. Aaron, you could do something with like how folks that are Appalachian that are Appalachian, how do they interact with people that are not from Appalachia? Super fascinating stuff that you all could do. You could use observations as a way to kind of refine that research question. Gathering preliminary data is something that Blakesley and Fleischer don't talk about too much, but it is something that you could do. Let's say, like, if you wanted to do a survey project or an interview project, testing out, or what we call piloting, that survey instrument or that interview protocol, and talking to a few folks and testing out that protocol or that survey, but also getting some preliminary data can help you refine that question a little bit more, and like, oh, that's definitely not the way that I was going, or I have a new question based on the feedback that I have. So getting some preliminary data is one way that you could test out that research question and refine it a bit further. What I want to talk a fair bit more is about how researchers in the field talk to others, and that's a part that Blakesley and Fleischer talk about. Aside from reading scholarship, which I think that you could make the case that it's also a form of talking to others, researchers in the field communicate with other scholars as they develop ideas for research. So they start with an initial hunch, and then they talk to other researchers. You can think of conferences as a way that scholars do this, definitely in our discipline, but also in online spaces. Like, there's a healthy Twitter community around writing studies, and folks kind of bounce ideas off each other in Twitter and in other spaces as well. If you lived through writing assessment theory and practice last summer, you suffered through a presentation that I scripted out for the 2017 Conference on College Composition and Communication. And I think that this is a good example of the talking to others idea. I was working some ideas out about how to do anti-racism and writing assessment, and do that in writing classrooms that are majority white. The students I teach at Shawnee State University, they are majority white. So what does anti-racism look like? That thing that Asao Inoue writes about, that, the stuff that he did in Arizona or at Fresno State or in Washington State. How might that be done at a place like Shawnee State University? This is just a very different institution. I offered some ideas during the presentation. You read it, read parts of that. And then after the meeting, after that presentation, Bob Broad, who's pretty well known in writing assessment circles, was in attendance. He came up to me, talked to me, offered some encouragement, said you should read these things, you should think about these ideas. So the way that folks talk to others is a huge way that folks refine their research ideas, how they go beyond that initial research question into something that they're actually going to use to fuel their inquiry project, their research. In week 3 of research methods, we're going to do some of this talking to others kind of thing that Blakesley and Fleischer write about. And we're going to do that to help you refine your research question. I'm going to ask everyone to email me with some times where you can meet for roughly 20 minutes or so to talk about your topic and to talk about where your thinking is right now on your project. We'll also talk about we'll talk about your current research question, and we'll also talk about some of the ethical issues that might be involved with your project and that are involved in developing your research question. And those are issues that Blakesley and Fleischer write about a fair bit in what you're going to read for week 3. This week involves a little bit of reading in Blakesley and Fleischer. I'm going to ask that you read pages 34 to 50 in that text. They write in this section about how to narrow your research question and using some of those different methods that I just talked about. And they're also going to talk in a fair bit more detail about ethical considerations for developing a research question. Read that stuff closely. I'm going to ask that you write in your discussion board post about the process of narrowing your research question. You're going to try out some of these methods. You're going to talk to me. So that conversation will happen on the discussion board. I'll help you kind of think through through your research question a little bit. I'm going to ask everyone to meet with me and to talk about the ethical issues and the bias issues that Blakesley and Fleischer talk about. So you want to read pretty closely pages 43 to 50 in that text and be prepared to talk about how you think that might relate to the project that you're thinking about. This week we're also going to continue to make progress on our research journals. I'm going to ask that you read at least 2 articles related to your project and complete 2 journal entries in either your journal, your log, or whatever you're calling that document, where you keep track of the notes of your reading notes for that project. Like we learned in week 2, reading and thinking through what you read is one of the more important ways researchers that they refine their topics. They talk to others, they read. That's probably the 2 major ones, but then there's also the observations and collecting preliminary data. If you're stuck finding sources, now would be an excellent time to reach out to me. I'm pretty good about finding sources in our discipline. The librarians might be able to help you out a little bit, but me, Dr. Jen Scott, Dr. Knudsen, we can help you out with that. So definitely reach out if you're having questions. That's it for now. Looking forward to chatting with you guys in week 3, getting caught up about your research projects, learning a little bit more about what it is you're interested in studying, and talking about some of those ethical issues that might be there, and again, helping you refine a potential research question. That's it for now. Hope you all are doing well. I'll talk to you all soon.